Ilara had always felt a distance between herself and the people in her village. From a very young age she had noticed it, the way people whispered when she walked by, the small glances full of suspicion, the quiet murmurs that seemed to follow her everywhere. She never understood exactly why, but the feeling of being different was strong. She was quiet, thoughtful, and often lost in her own world, looking at the mountains beyond the village with a longing she could never explain. Her family was simple, living on the edge of the village where the small cottages gave way to rolling fields and dense woods. Her father had died when she was little, leaving her mother to work hard just to provide for them. They were not poor, but they were not wealthy either, and their lives were filled with practical needs rather than luxuries. Ilara helped her mother as much as she could, tending to the garden, fetching water from the well, and running errands. Despite her helpful nature, the villagers still treated her with suspicion. The whispers started with small things. Someone would notice her helping an injured bird and would comment that she had too much curiosity about animals that were considered strange or unlucky. Another would mention her solitary walks in the woods, calling her reckless. Ilara tried to ignore it at first, focusing on her daily tasks and the small joys she could find in nature. She loved the quiet of the forest, the way the wind moved through the trees, and the soft murmur of streams hidden behind thick bushes. As she grew older, the isolation became more pronounced. Children her age would play in groups, and she was often left out. At school, she was polite and studious, but her shyness and difference made her a target for gossip. The villagers began to speak more openly about her, weaving stories that were far from the truth. Some said she brought bad luck. Others whispered that her family had a shadowed past. Ilara did not know how to fight back. She could only continue with her work and retreat to the comfort of the mountains she loved from afar. The turning point came one harsh winter morning. The snow had fallen heavily the night before, covering the village in a thick white blanket. The wind was sharp and cold, and the villagers gathered in the town square for a meeting. There had been talk for months about what to do with Ilara, fueled by fear and superstition. The elders, who rarely made decisions without consulting each other, had decided that she could no longer remain among them. They believed her presence brought trouble, and in their narrow view, she did not belong. Ilara was summoned to the square, where faces she had known her entire life looked at her with coldness she had never experienced before. Her mother stood beside her, holding her hand tightly, her eyes filled with worry and sorrow. The elders spoke, their voices loud enough for everyone to hear. They said that Ilara must leave the village, that her life here was over, and that she would never be welcome again. The words hit her like a physical blow. She felt a hollow emptiness spread through her chest, a mixture of fear, confusion, and grief. Tears blurred her vision as she turned to her mother. Her mother whispered softly, trying to comfort her, telling her that she must be brave and find a place where she could live freely, away from judgment. Ilara nodded, though her heart felt heavy. She gathered a few belongings, a small bag with essentials, a worn cloak, and a few personal items that held memories of better times. She hugged her mother tightly, feeling the warmth of her embrace one last time before stepping into the cold, unknown world beyond the village. The journey into the mountains was not easy. The snow was deep and the wind cut through her clothing, making her shiver despite her efforts to stay warm. The paths she took were difficult and unfamiliar, winding through dense forests and over rocky hills. Her hands were numb from the cold and her feet ached from the long trek, yet she pressed on, driven by a mixture of fear, hope, and the faint promise of freedom that lay somewhere beyond the valley. Each step brought a mixture of loneliness and reflection. Ilara thought about her life, the people who had turned against her, and the family she had left behind. She questioned herself, wondering if she had done something wrong, if there was a flaw in her that made people so quick to judge. But deep down, she also felt a flicker of determination. She would not let their fear define her. She would find a place where she could simply live without the constant scrutiny and suspicion. The nights were the hardest. She had no shelter, only the trees and rocks to shield her from the cold. She built small fires to keep warm, gathering sticks and dry leaves whenever she could find them. The firelight danced on her face, casting shadows that reminded her of the village and the people she had left behind. She spoke to herself softly, trying to keep her spirits up, telling herself that she would find a new life, a place where she could belong. During one particularly bitter night, As the wind howled through the trees, she stumbled upon a small stream, partially frozen over. The sound of the water, despite the cold, was soothing. She knelt beside it, cupping the icy water in her hands to drink. The reflection in the stream showed her pale, tired face, but also the determination in her eyes. She realized that this journey, though frightening and uncertain, was the first step toward reclaiming her life. The mountains seemed endless, but they also offered a strange kind of comfort. The snow-covered peaks were majestic, and the forests were alive with subtle sounds, the rustle of small animals, the whisper of the wind through the trees, the distant call of a bird. For the first time, Ilara felt a connection with the world that had always seemed indifferent to her in the village. Here, in the vastness of nature, she could be herself without fear of judgment. Days passed, and Ilara grew more accustomed to the challenges of survival. She found small caves and sheltered spots where she could rest, collected berries and edible plants, and learned to recognize animal tracks. Every day was a struggle, but with each challenge she felt a growing sense of self-reliance. She was no longer just the outcast from the village. She was becoming a young woman capable of facing the world on her own terms. One afternoon, as she climbed a steep ridge, she paused to catch her breath and looked out over the valley below. The village was a distant speck, nearly hidden by the white blanket of snow. A mixture of relief and sadness washed over her. She had left the people who had judged her, and while the memory of their words still stung, she also felt the first taste of freedom she had ever known. The mountains, with all their harshness and beauty, were now her home, and the possibilities they held seemed endless. Ilara's journey had only just begun, and she knew that the path ahead would be full of challenges. Yet for the first time she felt a spark of hope. She could survive, she could adapt, and maybe, just maybe, she could find a life that was truly her own. The mountains were vast, but they offered something the village never had: space to breathe, room to grow, and the promise of a new beginning. As the sun dipped behind the peaks, casting long shadows over the snow, Ilara took a deep breath and stepped forward, ready to face whatever the mountains would bring. Ilara had been walking for days through the endless stretches of snow and rugged terrain. Each step was heavy, and her body ached from the cold and the effort of navigating the mountains. She had begun to understand that the journey was more than just physical. It was a test of her determination and her spirit. She had left everything familiar behind, and now every decision she made could mean the difference between survival and despair. One evening, as the sky turned pink and orange with the setting sun, Ilara noticed smoke rising in the distance. Her heart leapt with hope and fear. Could it be a village, or someone else living in these remote mountains? She followed the smoke cautiously, moving through dense trees and over rocks, careful not to make too much noise. As she approached, she saw a small cabin tucked away in a grove of pine trees, almost hidden from view. The smoke was coming from a chimney curling gently into the sky. Ilara felt a mixture of relief and nervousness. She had been alone for so long that the thought of encountering another person was both comforting and frightening. She hesitated for a moment, unsure if she should approach, but the cold and her fatigue left her with little choice. She moved closer, stepping quietly on the soft snow, and knocked on the wooden door. The door opened slowly and a man appeared. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with hands that looked like they had seen years of hard work. His eyes were sharp and assessing, taking in her appearance carefully. Ilara felt a flicker of fear. She had been alone for so long that she was not used to strangers, but she spoke with as much calm as she could muster, explaining that she had been traveling and needed shelter for the night. The man, whose name was Thorin, studied her for a long moment before nodding. He stepped aside to let her enter. The cabin was small but warm, with a fire crackling in the hearth and a simple bed in the corner. Thorin moved with quiet efficiency, offering her a blanket and some stew he had been preparing. Ilara accepted gratefully, feeling the warmth seep into her frozen limbs. As she ate, she noticed the careful order of the cabin, the tools neatly arranged, and the way Thorin seemed completely at ease in this place that was entirely his own. The first night was quiet, but uneasy. Ilara had spent so long alone that sharing space with another person felt strange. Thorin did not speak much, but his presence was steady, and it gave her a sense of safety she had not felt in a long time. She slept fitfully, listening to the wind outside and the occasional creak of the cabin settling. When she awoke, the fire had burned low and Thorin was already preparing breakfast. He moved with a rhythm that spoke of years of self-reliance and familiarity with the harshness of the mountains. Over the next few days, Ilara and Thorin settled into a quiet routine. She helped gather firewood, fetch water from a nearby stream, and prepare meals. Thorin taught her to recognize safe plants, how to track small animals, and ways to stay warm in the bitter cold. At first, Ilara was hesitant, unsure if she could meet his expectations or if she would do something wrong. But Thorin was patient, correcting gently and showing rather than telling when it was necessary. His teaching was calm and deliberate, without any trace of judgment. As they worked together, a bond began to form. Ilara noticed the small kindnesses Thorin offered: a warm blanket left near her bed, a piece of dried fruit saved for her, the careful attention he paid to her movements when she struggled with the chopping of wood. She began to understand that his silence was not coldness but thoughtfulness. He observed first, spoke when necessary, and acted with intention. It was a different kind of interaction from what she had known in the village, and it felt comforting. One afternoon, as they walked along a narrow path to gather supplies, Ilara asked Thorin about his life. He paused, considering her question before speaking. He told her about growing up in the mountains, learning to hunt and survive, and how he had chosen solitude after losses he had endured. His voice was steady, yet there was a quiet sadness beneath it. Ilara listened, realizing that he had faced hardships and made choices that had shaped him into the person he was. She felt a connection forming, a sense of understanding that went beyond words. Ilara began to share her own story as well, cautiously at first. She spoke of her village, the suspicion and fear she had faced, and the moment she had been cast out. Thorin listened without interruption, nodding occasionally, never offering judgment. For the first time in her life, she felt that her words were heard and valued. It was a strange and comforting feeling to have someone see her as a person, rather than a subject of gossip or fear. Days turned into weeks, and the mountains became a place of learning and healing. Ilara's confidence grew as she mastered new skills, from building small shelters to understanding the behavior of the animals around them. She began to feel a sense of belonging, not to a village or a community, but to a life she was building with her own hands. Thorin's presence was steady and reassuring, a constant reminder that she was not alone. One evening, as snow fell gently outside, Thorin invited Ilara to sit by the fire. He had been preparing dried meat and berries, and they shared a simple meal together. The conversation was quiet but meaningful, a mixture of practical advice, shared observations about the mountains, and stories from their pasts. The firelight illuminated their faces, highlighting the lines of fatigue, resilience, and growing trust. In that warmth, Ilara felt a sense of peace she had not known in years. Thorin began to teach her about the deeper skills of living in the mountains: how to read the weather, when to move and when to stay put, and how to protect oneself from the dangers that lurked in the wilderness. Ilara listened intently, absorbing every word and applying it with care. Each skill she learned gave her more confidence, and she began to see herself not as a castaway but as a capable and resourceful young woman. The bond between them grew stronger, not through grand gestures or declarations, but through shared experience and quiet understanding. Thorin respected her independence, never forcing her to do more than she was comfortable with, and Ilara admired his knowledge and quiet strength. In each other they found companionship and a sense of safety that neither had experienced before. One day, as they were repairing a section of the cabin roof, a sudden snowstorm hit. The wind howled and the snow fell thick and fast, covering the landscape in white. Thorin and Ilara worked quickly, moving together with efficiency and care. The storm was intense, but their cooperation and trust in each other made the challenge manageable. When the storm finally subsided, they stood together, looking out over the transformed landscape. The mountains were harsh and beautiful, a reminder of the life they had chosen and the resilience they had cultivated. As the days continued, Ilara realized that the mountains had become a place of freedom and possibility. She no longer feared being alone or judged. She had found a companion in Thorin, a teacher, and a friend who saw her for who she truly was. The isolation that had once terrified her was now a source of strength and growth. She began to dream not of returning to her old life, but of building a new one, rooted in the mountains and the skills she had learned. The trust and understanding between them deepened naturally. Thorin began to include her in decisions about daily life, asking for her input and valuing her judgment. Elara, in turn, felt a sense of responsibility and pride in contributing meaningfully. The cabin, once just a place of shelter, had become a home where both could thrive, a place of learning, protection, and mutual respect. Elara realized that she had come far, not just in distance but in growth. She had faced fear, uncertainty, and harsh conditions, yet she had persevered. In the quiet of the mountains, she had discovered her strength and resilience, and in Thorin, she had found a connection that offered safety, guidance, and companionship. The mountains no longer seemed lonely. They were full of life, lessons, and promise, and with each passing day, Elara felt more certain that she had found not just a temporary refuge, but a place where she could truly belong. Weeks passed, and the quiet routine of the mountains began to feel natural to Elara. The harsh winter was fading, giving way to early spring, and the snow melted slowly, revealing patches of green beneath. Life in the mountains demanded constant attention and effort, but it also offered rewards that Elara had never experienced before. She felt alive in a way that the village had never allowed her to feel. Each day brought new challenges, small victories, and the deep satisfaction of growing stronger and more capable. Elara and Thorin's partnership had grown beyond simple cooperation. They shared tasks effortlessly, each understanding the other's habits and rhythms. Thorin would rise before dawn, tending to the fire and preparing breakfast while Elara fetched water or checked the surroundings for supplies. She admired his quiet diligence, the careful way he measured his steps and considered each decision. Thorin in turn noticed her attentiveness and willingness to learn, appreciating her curiosity and intelligence. Their bond was built slowly, quietly on respect and shared experience. One morning, after a night of rain, the sun broke through the clouds and lit the mountains with a golden glow. Elara and Thorin decided to explore a nearby ridge, looking for better paths and sources of water. The climb was steep, but the view from the top was breathtaking. Rolling hills stretched in every direction, dotted with forests and streams. Elara felt a deep sense of wonder and gratitude. This was a life of freedom and discovery, far from the judgment she had known in the village. During their exploration, they came across signs of wildlife, a deer trail, bird nests, and the remnants of a small fox den. Thorin explained how to read these signs, teaching Elara to understand the rhythms of the forest. She listened carefully, asking questions and practicing the techniques he showed her. Each lesson brought a sense of accomplishment, and Elara began to feel capable and self-reliant. She was learning skills that would keep her safe and connected to the land. Skills that gave her a confidence she had never felt before. Evenings were spent by the fire, sharing stories and reflecting on the day's work. Thorin spoke of his past, of the losses he had endured, and of the choice to live in solitude. He did not speak often of feelings, but his words carried a depth that Elara recognized. She shared her own experiences cautiously at first, speaking of the village, the rejection and the loneliness that had driven her into the mountains. Thorin listened attentively, never interrupting or dismissing her. The act of being heard without judgment was new and comforting to Elara. As they spent more time together, Elara began to notice small acts of kindness that went beyond simple courtesy. Thorin would leave a warm cup of tea by the fire before he went out to check the surroundings. He would silently watch over her while she attempted difficult tasks, stepping in only when necessary. Elara responded in kind, ensuring the cabin was tidy, preparing meals carefully and always remaining attentive to his needs as well. Their relationship was quiet, grounded in mutual respect, and growing into something deeper without words needing to define it. One day, while gathering herbs near a small stream, Elara slipped on the wet rocks and twisted her ankle. Pain shot through her leg and she cried out, startled and afraid. Thorin appeared almost instantly, steadying her and helping her sit on a nearby rock. He examined her ankle carefully, then helped her walk back to the cabin with slow, deliberate steps. Elara felt vulnerable in a way she had never allowed herself to be before, but Thorin's calm presence made her feel safe. She realized that trust was not just about listening or learning. It was about relying on someone and being relied upon in return. The days continued, and Elara's confidence grew alongside her skills. She learned to chop wood efficiently, identify edible plants, and recognize dangerous areas to avoid. She even began to anticipate Thorin's instructions, understanding his methods and reasoning. Their cooperation became seamless, like two halves of a whole, and the cabin, once a simple shelter, became a hub of life, learning, and shared purpose. As spring progressed, the forest around the cabin came alive with color and sound. Birds sang in the mornings, flowers bloomed along the trails, and small animals emerged from their winter hiding places. Ilara felt a deep connection to this world, a sense that she was part of something larger than herself. The mountains were no longer intimidating. They were partners in her growth, offering lessons, challenges, and beauty. Thorin had introduced her to this world, but she was beginning to experience it on her own terms, developing intuition, awareness, and appreciation for the natural rhythms around her. One afternoon, while collecting water from the stream, Ilara paused to observe a mother deer with her fawn. She watched their careful movements, the tender way the mother guided the young one through the forest. A sense of calm washed over her, a realization that life could be gentle and nurturing even in the midst of challenges. She felt a similar responsibility toward Thorin, toward the cabin, and toward herself. This was not just survival. It was learning to live fully and thoughtfully. Evenings brought shared silence by the fire, punctuated by the occasional conversation. They would talk about the weather, the wildlife, and plans for repairs or gathering. Thorin began to ask Ilara for her opinion on certain decisions, and she realized how much he valued her judgment. This recognition strengthened her sense of belonging, not just in the cabin but in the partnership they had developed. She was no longer an outsider. She was a participant, an equal, and a companion. One night, as snow began to fall lightly even in late spring, Ilara found herself staring into the fire, reflecting on the journey that had brought her here. She had faced rejection, fear, and isolation, yet she had survived and grown stronger. She had found a mentor, a friend, and a companion in Thorin. The mountains, which had once seemed vast and intimidating, had become a home and a source of empowerment. She realized that her life was no longer dictated by the judgment of others, but by her own choices, her courage, and the bonds she had formed. The bond between Ilara and Thorin deepened further during shared work and quiet moments. They repaired fences, built small structures to store food, and worked together to improve their living space. Each task, no matter how small, became an opportunity to understand one another better, to communicate without words, and to trust each other's capabilities. Ilara felt a growing sense of pride and belonging, a feeling that she had never experienced in the village. The connection between them was subtle, but undeniable. There were moments when a glance held meaning, when a shared laugh over a mistake conveyed more than words could express, when silence spoke volumes about trust and understanding. Ilara realized that the mountains had not only tested her resilience, but had also opened her heart to the possibility of deep connection, companionship, and understanding. One morning, as they prepared to check on a distant part of their territory, Thorin paused and handed Ilara a small bundle of dried herbs and berries. He did not speak of their significance, but the gesture communicated care, thoughtfulness, and attention. Ilara felt a warmth spread through her, recognizing that this life, though challenging, was rich with meaning, connection, and growth. It was a life built on trust, shared labor, and mutual respect, a life she had never imagined she could have. As they walked together through the forest, Ilara reflected on the journey that had brought her here. She had been cast out, feared, and judged, yet she had found a place where she could grow, learn, and be valued. The mountains, with their beauty and challenges, had given her strength, independence, and purpose. Thorin, with his quiet wisdom and steady presence, had shown her that companionship could be gentle, respectful, and empowering. In the quiet rhythm of daily life, Ilara found not just survival but a sense of peace, growth, and hope for the future. Spring had fully arrived in the mountains, and the world seemed alive with colors, sounds, and motion. The snow had melted from most of the valleys, leaving streams of clear water that reflected the sunlight. Flowers peeked through the soil and trees budded with bright green leaves. Ilara had grown accustomed to this rhythm of life, her days filled with purpose, work, and the growing bond she shared with Thorin. Yet she had no idea that the tranquility of their mountain life would soon be challenged. It happened one bright morning when Ilara was gathering firewood near the edge of the forest. She noticed movement in the distance, figures climbing over the ridge toward their cabin. At first, she hoped it was travelers seeking shelter, but as the figures drew closer, she recognized the shapes of villagers from her own past. Panic and fear surged through her chest. These were the people who had driven her out, the ones who had labeled her an outcast, and now they were here, in the mountains, looking for her. She hurried back to the cabin, her heart pounding. Thorin noticed her distress immediately and asked what was wrong. Elara explained, her voice shaking, that people from her village were approaching, some of whom had been cruel and unkind to her. Thorin listened, his face calm but serious. He had faced dangers before, and he knew this situation could be tense. He prepared quickly, securing the cabin and making sure they had the upper hand in terms of safety. When the villagers arrived, their expressions were a mix of anger, confusion, and disbelief. They had expected to find a frightened girl, maybe even someone ready to apologize for leaving, but they found Elara and Thorin standing together, confident and composed. The leader of the group, an elder from the village, stepped forward, demanding that Elara return with them immediately. They accused Thorin of harboring a rebellious outcast and spoke harshly about her past. Elara felt a surge of anger and fear. She realized that their judgment had never changed, that they still saw her as someone who did not belong. But for the first time, she also felt a surge of strength. She no longer depended on their approval or feared their opinions. She stood beside Thorin, who had silently signaled that he would support her no matter what. The mountains had given her courage, independence, and resilience, and she was ready to defend the life she had built. Thorin spoke quietly but firmly, telling the villagers that Elara would not be returning with them. His words carried weight and authority. He explained that she had chosen this life and that she was safe, capable, and free from the judgment of the village. The villagers were shocked. They had never seen him speak in this way, nor had they anticipated that Elara would stand her ground. Their surprise turned into frustration, but they realized that they could not force her to leave, at least not without confrontation. The villagers attempted to persuade her, using arguments about family, duty, and tradition, but Elara remained calm. She spoke about the life she had built, the skills she had learned, and the person she had become. She told them that she had found strength, purpose, and companionship in the mountains, and that she would not abandon the home she had chosen. Her words were measured, confident, and clear. The villagers were silent, realizing that she was no longer the frightened, uncertain girl they had once known. As the confrontation continued, Thorin remained a steady presence. He did not shout or threaten, but his confidence and calm authority made it clear that they would not succeed. The villagers, though angry, began to sense that their power over Elara was gone. They had tried to control her life, but she had grown beyond their influence. The mountains had changed her, and with Thorin by her side, she was no longer alone or vulnerable. After a long discussion, the villagers finally left, muttering and shaking their heads. They had come with the intention of forcing her back, but they left empty-handed, unable to challenge the bond and determination that had formed between Elara and Thorin. As the last of them disappeared over the ridge, Elara felt a mixture of relief and exhaustion. She had faced the fear of her past and emerged stronger, with a renewed sense of self and the knowledge that she could defend her choices. Thorin placed a hand on her shoulder, a silent gesture of support and reassurance. Elara felt a warmth spread through her, a mixture of gratitude, trust, and the realization that she had found a true partner in life. Their relationship had deepened in ways that went beyond survival and companionship. They had become each other's strength, shelter, and source of courage. In the days that followed, life returned to its quiet rhythm. Elara and Thorin worked on repairing fences, reinforcing the cabin, and preparing for the changing seasons. The encounter with the villagers had left its mark, but it also strengthened their bond. Elara felt more confident than ever in her ability to face challenges, both in the mountains and in her own heart. She understood now that her worth was not determined by the opinions of others, but by her actions, her choices, and the relationships she nurtured. The natural beauty of the mountains offered a constant reminder of life's possibilities. Elara spent hours observing the streams, the wildlife, and the changing patterns of light and weather. She learned to anticipate storms, track animals, and gather food efficiently. Each skill she acquired was a testament to her resilience and adaptability, reinforcing her belief in her own strength. Evenings were still spent by the fire, where they shared meals, conversation, and quiet reflection. Thorin spoke of the wisdom he had gained from years in solitude, while Alara shared her observations and insights. Their dialogue was not about dominance or instruction, but about mutual understanding and growth. In these moments, Alara realized that she had found not just safety and shelter, but a life rich with meaning, purpose, and connection. One afternoon, they decided to explore a distant part of the forest, searching for medicinal plants and new sources of water. The trek was challenging, with steep inclines and uneven terrain, but the experience strengthened their cooperation and trust. Ilara's confidence in her abilities grew as she navigated the difficult paths and assisted Thorin in managing obstacles. She felt a deep sense of accomplishment and pride, recognizing that she had transformed from a frightened, uncertain girl into a capable, independent young woman. During a quiet moment by a clear, bubbling stream, Thorin showed Alara how to identify and collect herbs for healing and cooking. He explained their properties, their uses, and the importance of careful observation. Alara absorbed the knowledge eagerly, appreciating the depth of skill and experience that Thorin possessed. She realized that their partnership was not only about survival, but also about learning, growth, and the sharing of knowledge. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Alara and Thorin returned to their cabin, tired but satisfied. The mountains had tested them, but they had succeeded together. Their bond had been strengthened by challenges, cooperation, and the shared experience of facing fear and uncertainty. Alara felt a deep sense of belonging, not to a village or a group of people, but to the life she was creating with Thorin in the mountains. The encounter with the villagers had left a lasting impression. Alara understood that fear, judgment, and prejudice could not define her life. She had found her own path, one guided by courage, resilience, and the support of someone who truly understood her. The mountains, with their beauty and challenges, had provided the space for her to grow, heal, and discover her own strength. In the quiet evenings that followed, as the stars appeared above the peaks, Alara reflected on the journey that had brought her here. She had faced rejection, fear, and isolation, yet she had emerged stronger and more confident. She had discovered skills, strength, and knowledge that allowed her to thrive in the wilderness. And most importantly, she had found Thorin, a companion whose presence offered safety, wisdom, and trust. Together, they had created a life that was rich with meaning and possibility. The mountains were no longer a place of fear and solitude. They were a home, a source of growth, and a sanctuary of mutual respect and companionship. Alara knew that challenges would continue to come, but she also knew that she had the strength, skills, and support to face whatever the future might bring. In Thorin, she had found more than a friend or teacher. She had found someone who chose her, not because of who she had been, but because of who she had become. And in that choice, she discovered a freedom, belonging, and hope that would carry her forward into whatever lay ahead. Spring had fully taken over the mountains, and life around the cabin was vibrant with energy and color. Flowers had begun to bloom, streams gurgled with clear water, and the trees swayed gently in the soft breeze. Alara had grown strong and confident, her skills honed by months of living closely with the land and learning from Thorin. Her heart, once heavy with fear and loneliness, now carried a quiet sense of contentment and hope. Alara and Thorin continued their daily routines with efficiency and grace. They worked together to maintain the cabin, gather firewood, and prepare meals. Each task was more than survival. It was an opportunity to understand one another better and to create a life built on trust and cooperation. Their bond had deepened through shared experiences, quiet moments, and mutual respect. Words were often unnecessary. A glance, a gesture, or a simple action could communicate their understanding and connection. One morning, while walking through the forest to collect water, Alara paused to observe a small family of deer grazing near the edge of a clearing. She watched them carefully, noting the way the mother guided her young fawn through the terrain. The moment reminded her of her own journey, of how she had been guided and supported by Thorin, and how she had grown through challenges and trust. She felt a warmth in her chest, a deep appreciation for life, growth, and companionship. Thorin approached quietly, noticing her thoughtful expression. He did not ask what she was thinking, understanding that some moments were meant to be felt rather than spoken about. They continued their walk, collecting herbs and small plants for food and medicine, their steps in rhythm with the forest around them. The mountains were alive with sounds, movement, and beauty, and they felt a part of it. connected to the land and to each other. As the weeks passed, Elara and Thorin began to expand their knowledge of the mountains. They explored further into the forests, mapping paths, discovering hidden springs, and learning which areas were safe and which demanded caution. Elara had become adept at reading the signs of the land, tracking animals, predicting weather changes, and recognizing the subtle shifts that indicated danger. Thorin watched her with quiet pride, acknowledging her growth and independence without needing to voice it. The companionship between them continued to grow, built on shared respect, mutual care, and a deep understanding of one another's strengths and weaknesses. They laughed together at small mishaps, supported each other through challenges, and found joy in the simplicity of daily life. The cabin, once a place of mere shelter, had become a home filled with warmth, learning, and life. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, Elara and Thorin sat by the fire. They shared a simple meal, the flickering flames reflecting in their eyes. Elara felt a sense of peace that she had never known before, a realization that she was no longer defined by the judgment of others. She had created a life of meaning, resilience, and connection, guided by her own choices and the support of someone who truly understood her. Thorin spoke softly about the coming summer, discussing plans for expanding their storage and preparing for warmer months. Elara listened carefully, contributing her own ideas and suggestions. Their conversations were collaborative and respectful, reflecting the deep partnership they had built. Elara realized that this was a life she had always dreamed of, not wealth or recognition, but freedom, understanding, and the ability to live authentically. As summer approached, the forest became lush and full of life. Birds sang loudly in the mornings, streams flowed freely, and the air was filled with the scent of blooming flowers. Elara and Thorin continued to explore, learn, and grow together. They built small traps for animals, harvested plants for medicine, and strengthened the cabin against potential storms. Each day brought new challenges and new lessons, reinforcing their resilience and cooperation. One afternoon, while collecting firewood near a steep incline, Elara slipped and nearly fell. Thorin was immediately at her side, steadying her and helping her regain balance. The moment, though small, highlighted the trust and reliance that had developed between them. Elara realized that she had found not only a teacher and companion, but also someone who would stand by her in moments of vulnerability. The mountains, once a place of isolation and fear, had become a sanctuary where trust, care, and mutual respect flourished. Evenings continued to be a time of reflection and quiet connection. They shared stories, discussed plans for the future, and enjoyed the simple pleasure of each other's presence. Elara often thought back to the village, to the judgment and fear she had faced, and she felt a sense of gratitude for the journey that had brought her here. The hardships had shaped her, the mountains had strengthened her, and Thorin had guided her to a life of meaning and companionship. As the season progressed, Elara felt a deep sense of belonging. She was no longer defined by the fears or prejudices of others. She had found her place in the world, not in a village or among strangers, but in the mountains and alongside someone who valued her for who she was. The life they had built together was rich with purpose, connection, and resilience. One evening, as they watched the sun set behind the peaks, Thorin reached out and gently took Elara's hand. It was a simple gesture, but it carried a depth of meaning, trust, care, and the unspoken promise of companionship. Elara felt a warmth and certainty she had never known before. She realized that she had found a home, not just in the mountains, but in the life they were creating together. The days continued with the rhythm of work, exploration, and learning. Elara and Thorin grew closer, their partnership deepening with every shared experience. They faced challenges together, celebrated small victories, and supported each other through moments of uncertainty. The mountains, with their beauty and demands, had shaped them both, teaching lessons of resilience, trust, and the value of connection. Elara knew that her journey was not just about survival. It was about living fully, embracing challenges, and finding joy and purpose in every moment. She had been cast out once, judged and feared, but she had found a life where she was valued, respected, and loved. The mountains had given her freedom, independence, and the opportunity to grow, and Thorin had become the companion who shared that journey with her. As the night fell and the stars appeared above the peaks, Elara felt a profound sense of peace. She had faced fear, rejection, and uncertainty, yet she had emerged stronger, wiser, and more confident. The life she shared with Thorin was a testament to resilience, trust, and the power of human connection. Together, they had built a home, a sanctuary, and a life that neither the judgment of others nor the challenges of the world could take away. Elara understood that the mountains were more than a place of refuge. They were a place of transformation, where she had discovered her strength, independence, and the capacity to love and be loved. Thorin had chosen her, not because of her past or her circumstances, but because of who she had become. In that choice, she found freedom, belonging, and hope, a life built on courage, trust, and the quiet joy of companionship. Summer had settled fully into the mountains, bringing warmth, long days, and a sense of abundance. The forest was alive with the buzz of insects, the songs of birds, and the gentle rustle of leaves in the wind. Elara woke each morning with energy and a renewed sense of purpose. She had grown stronger, wiser, and more confident through months of living in the mountains with Thorin. Their life together had evolved into a harmonious rhythm, where each day was filled with meaningful work, shared experiences, and quiet moments of reflection. Elara had become adept at navigating the mountains, reading the signs of the land and predicting the weather. She could recognize the tracks of animals, identify edible plants, and find safe paths through dense forests. Thorin had taught her these skills, but she had learned them through practice, observation, and perseverance. The mountains had become her teacher, shaping her into a capable and resourceful young woman. She felt a deep connection to the land and a sense of pride in her own abilities. Thorin had grown to rely on her in ways that went beyond practical skills. He trusted her judgment, valued her insights, and appreciated her companionship. Their relationship had deepened naturally over time, built on mutual respect, understanding, and shared experiences. They did not need constant conversation to understand each other. A glance, a gesture, or a quiet action often conveyed more than words ever could. Elara felt a sense of belonging and partnership that she had never experienced before. One morning, while walking along a narrow trail to check on a hidden spring, Elara noticed a patch of unusual flowers she had never seen before. She called Thorin over, and together they examined the plants, discussing their possible uses and properties. Thorin was impressed by her curiosity and careful observations. Elara realized that her knowledge and confidence had grown so much that she could contribute equally to their life and survival. It was a moment of pride and satisfaction, a reminder of how far she had come from the frightened, lonely girl who had once been cast out. As the days passed, they focused on preparing for the changing seasons. They reinforced the cabin, built extra storage for food, and crafted tools that would make daily tasks easier. Elara enjoyed these projects, feeling a sense of accomplishment with each improvement. Thorin guided her when necessary, but allowed her the space to make decisions and learn from her experiences. Their partnership was balanced, rooted in respect and trust, and it strengthened with every shared effort. One afternoon, as they were gathering berries, they spotted a young fox caught in a trap left by hunters. The animal struggled, its small body trembling with fear. Elara felt a surge of compassion and instinctively moved to help. With Thorin's guidance, she carefully freed the fox without harming it. The fox paused for a moment, looking at them with cautious curiosity, before darting into the forest. The encounter left Elara with a sense of satisfaction and connection to the natural world. She understood that living in the mountains meant not just survival, but also respecting and protecting the life around them. Evenings were filled with quiet reflection and conversation. They would sit by the fire, sharing stories, discussing plans, and sometimes just enjoying the silence together. Elara often thought about her past, the village, and the hardships she had faced. She realized that every challenge had shaped her. Every rejection had led her to this place, and every skill she had learned had made her stronger. The mountains had given her freedom, independence, and a sense of purpose she had never known before. One day, while exploring a remote part of the forest, Elara and Thorin discovered a hidden waterfall cascading into a crystal-clear pool. They marveled at its beauty and the sense of tranquility it brought. Elara felt a deep connection to the world around her, a realization that she had found a place where she truly belonged. The waterfall became a special place for them, a sanctuary for rest, reflection, and shared moments away from the demands of daily life. As the summer progressed, they faced challenges that tested their resilience and cooperation. A sudden storm swept through the mountains, bringing heavy rain and strong winds. Trees were uprooted, streams overflowed, and the cabin was threatened. Ilara and Thorin worked tirelessly to secure their home, reinforcing the roof, clearing debris, and ensuring that supplies were safe. The storm was intense, but their teamwork and trust in each other allowed them to weather it successfully. When the skies cleared, they stood together, exhausted but triumphant, knowing they had overcome yet another challenge. Ilara reflected on the growth she had experienced. She had learned to navigate the mountains, care for herself, and build a life rooted in resilience and independence. She had discovered the value of partnership, trust, and companionship, and she had realized that the hardships she had faced in the village were not the end of her story, but the beginning of a life that was truly her own. One evening, as the sun set and the sky turned a deep shade of orange and purple, Thorin and Ilara sat together by the fire. Thorin spoke softly about the future, sharing his hopes and plans for their continued life in the mountains. Ilara listened attentively, offering her own thoughts and ideas. The conversation was calm, filled with mutual respect and understanding. She felt a profound sense of belonging and certainty, knowing that they would face the future together side by side. The bond between them had grown beyond friendship or mentorship. It was a connection built on shared experience, trust, and the quiet understanding that they would always support and protect each other. Ilara realized that she had found not just a companion but a partner for life, someone who chose her for who she had become, not for her past or circumstances. As the summer days stretched longer, they continued to explore, work, and enjoy the beauty of the mountains. Each day brought new opportunities for learning, growth, and discovery. Ilara's confidence and skills continued to develop, and she felt a deep sense of pride in her accomplishments. The mountains, once intimidating and lonely, had become a home filled with life, connection, and purpose. One morning, while tending to the cabin garden, Ilara noticed signs that the seasons were beginning to shift once again. She and Thorin began preparing for autumn, gathering and preserving food, reinforcing the cabin and ensuring they were ready for colder days. The work was demanding, but they approached it with a sense of calm and cooperation, knowing that together they could handle any challenge. As the sun set over the mountains, casting long shadows across the forest, Ilara felt a deep sense of fulfillment. She had overcome fear, rejection, and uncertainty, emerging stronger, wiser, and more confident. She had found freedom, independence, and a life of meaning in the mountains. And most importantly, she had found Thorin, a companion who valued her, trusted her, and chose to share a life with her. In that quiet moment, surrounded by the beauty of the mountains and the warmth of their cabin, Ilara understood that she had truly arrived at a place of belonging. The journey had been long and difficult, but it had led her to a life of purpose, connection, and love. Together, she and Thorin would continue to face the challenges and joys of life in the mountains, building a future rooted in resilience, trust, and the quiet beauty of a shared life. And in that life, Ilara finally felt at home, fully embraced by the mountains, by her own strength, and by the companionship of someone who had chosen her for life.